energy. The sun provides the earth every day a dose of energy that is 15,000 times what we're currently using. So as we break free from these messages of what is the thought leap here that can move us forward? And my suggestion is that we move from the notion of we've hit the limits of a finite earth, which puts the problem out there on earth, not on us, because we actually, as I say, there's more than enough for us. And it puts us into the scarcity mode, and move to an ecological perspective in which we are thinking always about alignment with nature, not the limits of nature. It's just like when you're playing the piano, you just don't think about the 88 keys, you think about how do you create harmony. And that is the emergent ecological worldview that we see happening in everything from agroecology, as I mentioned earlier, where farmers in Niger, in a very, very poor area in Niger in Africa, where the desert seemed to be encroaching, and what did they do? They started to learn from their forefathers and mothers about regreening, just nurturing trees that were already stubs and encouraging them to grow in the fields. And they developed a form of agroforestry that is now perhaps the biggest transformation that I've read about, at least. 12.5 million acres of farmland regreened so that they can grow food, and people coming back into the villages who felt before they had to exit. That is not focused on growth or no growth or limits or not limits. It is about alignment with the earth itself and in building communities that are aligned with our nature, both the good, bad, and the ugly. Building communities where power is dispersed, where relationships are transparent, and where we're all taking mutual accountability instead of just pointing the finger at someone. So those are some of the thought traps that we need to leap beyond in to make this turn. The last one I'm going to tackle very briefly here is the idea that I hear more and more from my buddies that, you know, Frankie, they say, it's too late. It's too late. You know, the climate change, the effects of it, there are already more climate refugees than there are war refugees. We're going to be living with these consequences regardless of what we do now. It's too late. And my response to that is, too late for what? It's not too late for life. It's not too late for life. And let me just say that we're passing, well, I get my thoughts together on that. We're passing a sign-up sheet around. My daughter and I do not blanket people with emails, but if you'd like to keep up with the kind of work that Anna and I are doing, we send out about once a quarter, we'll send out an update of things that are exciting to us you might want to get involved in, or new things that have been particularly moving, or something that we're writing. So thank you if you want to sign on that. So the thought trap of it's too late, how do we release? My realization, I think, my case, if you will, my hypothesis is that it's not a big challenge that is a problem for human beings. Human beings have met incredible challenges when you think about the bubonic plague, or when you think about World War II and the destruction. Go on and on. It's not the challenge. What gets to us, what makes it impossible for human beings, is when we feel futile, when we don't feel useful, when we don't feel that we are included, and when we don't feel that we count. That's what does us in. And so in this moment of planetary possibility, what would it mean then to move from the it's too late to, hey, it's possible. We know how, and we know because we each are going to find our place in this absolutely extraordinary moment. How do we move there? Well, the thought leap, the shift in the mental map, is the big challenge here, is that we are lacking right now in our culture, in so many cultures, we are lacking a vision of democratic decision-making that is aligned with our nature. We've grown up with this thin notion of democracy as something unto us or for us somewhere else. It's not about us, and it doesn't really work very well. We need to develop consciously, in conversation and in storytelling about what works, examples of real living democracy coming up from the community, including democracy and economic life. And that means that, yes, a market economy is absolutely a brilliant invention, but it must have values boundaries to keep the market open and fair. Values boundaries that eliminate the monopoly power we see today, but also new forms of enterprise that are more democratic. For example, the cooperative. Do you realize that there are probably more people in the world who are members of cooperatives, of one person, one vote, a more democratic structure, than who own shares in publicly traded companies? And that, for example, India, where all you hear is the promise of high tech in a country where half of the children are suffering from malnutrition almost. It is the women in villages creating their own cooperatives, their own dairy cooperatives, that have created multiple times the number of jobs that have been created in all high tech in India. So to begin to envision democracy, it's not just about voting, it's about doing together in community. So that we start seeing things like this community-supported agriculture, for example, where the eater steps up and says, yeah, I'm part of this. I'm going to fork up some money at the beginning of the growing season. I'm responsible, too, for making our agriculture work. And the partnership with the farmer, that's not a separate food question. That's also democracy as well. And so we begin to envision democracy as a way of life that is something that taps these deep positive qualities that we know are in us. And we realize, in fact, there was just a new study done on decision making that I thought was fascinating, where they had 700 people in these small groups, and over this experiment they discovered that the quality of decision making was not about how smart the IQ was of the average or the smartest person in the group. The quality of decision making depended on how well people listened to one another and how how much they conversed and shared airtime, if you will. So democracy of this sort, of inclusion, of group decision making, and give you one example in Texas, where I'm from. It's hard for me to even believe this is true, but Texas is the reason that the US is a wind power leader. Do you know why Texas is a wind power leader? Because the utility companies in the 1990s in Texas got people together, ordinary citizens, over a long weekend and gave them a lot of material about options on energy. And these Texans, these ordinary Texans, decided that renewables were really important, and they shifted their views coming in once they got the information. And that then led the utility companies in Texas to invest in wind, and it's one of the reasons that the US is now a leader. So these kinds of practices are the direction that we can head. And the mother of all of these issues is regard to the emergence of real democracy is getting money out of politics and citizens' voices in. And that means voluntary public financing. So this is not a separate political issue, this is an environmental issue, and it works. Let me just give you one example. The state of Maine now, 80% of the legislators in the state of Maine have run without corporate money because they have a public financing system there. And so that now that state has been able to pass legislation that has required the recycling of e-waste by the corporation, the electronic equipment, and in less than a decade with this, they have kept 1 pound of lead out of the beautiful state of Maine environment for every single resident of Maine. So let me wrap up. How am I doing? Okay, so let me wrap up more personally. Because if I'm right, and if you've held this possibility then, at least today, if I'm right, or partially right, that we have it in us. We have the pro-social qualities that evolved over eons of time in social groups. We have the qualities in us. We're good enough. We don't have to be better people. What do we need? Well, my hypothesis is that we need more guts. We need more courage. And this is what we've got to work on, and I think I have some tips on how to get it. At least I'm trying to get it myself. And here's the challenge. It's this real strange irony. You know, we evolved in these closely knit tribes where we learned to trust our fear sensations. We learned to trust, you know, we learned to trust that we should be afraid of the tiger attacks. But we also learned that the scariest thing of all was to separate from the tribe, because that was sure death. But what happens if in the early 21st century, the hyper tribe is heading right over Victoria Falls? Then separation from the pack is life, not death. But it still brings up a lot of fear. So fear, maybe it too, like these other thoughts I've been arguing that we should shift our thinking about, fear itself is a thought that we should rethink. Maybe fear isn't a verdict that we're in the wrong place and wrong time and we should flee or fight or freeze. Maybe when we feel that fear of separation from the tribe, it's exactly what we need to be doing, and that's just pure energy. It's just information that we can take. And that is the energy of this moment, where if the culture as a whole is moving in the wrong direction, we have to step out. How do we do that? By well, I'll tell you, my little corny gimmick, since my daughter's not here, she's my cheese slicer, you know, she cuts the cheesy parts of my talks, but she's not here. So my trick is this, that my fear symptom is a heavily pounding heart, you know, that bum, 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 bum. So one day when I was experiencing that, actually it was Al Gore was there, and I was scared. And I couldn't get my hand up. And then the pounding heart, and I thought, oh, I used to call that you wimp, and now I think I'll call it inner applause. And once I renamed it inner applause, I got my hand up, but he didn't call on me. But I got my hand up. So the question then is not how do we become better people, but how do we get more courage to use our common sense and to be able to break free of the thought traps and to create an idea and a vision and a practice of democracy that really works across all dimensions of life, whether it's those gutsy farmers in Niger or those Indian village women who are creating the co-ops. How do we have that kind of courage? And here's the thought. There are a couple of ways. We have to understand that if we really are like organisms in any ecosystem, then we are shaped moment to moment. So how do we get more courage? We hang out with courage. We find our heroes, whether they're our everyday heroes, our fellow students, or professors, or people in the community, or faraway heroes that we get them close to us, because we will take on the characteristics of those who we bring into our lives. As I mentioned, the mirror neuron factor. And of course, we also know that we are strengthened. The University of Virginia study recently found that, well, they put groups of students, two groups of students at the foot of a hill, and they all had heavy backpacks on. And there was only one difference between the two groups. One had a friend by their side, and the other did not. And then they asked them, how steep is this hill? And they discovered that those who had a friend by their side saw the hill as significantly less steep. And the longer they had known this person, the less challenging it became. So to up our civil courage, I call it, it is bringing in heroes into our everyday lives, taking those risks. And I suggest that another way to become more courageous is that no matter how small the step is, literally down to the Al Gore changing light bulbs thing, which drove me crazy, but whatever it is, whether it is choosing a diet that is planet friendly, whether it is speaking out and supporting someone who is moving our society in a direction